the county we hear them calling from every corner of this fair land. The women who built this world of ours, the women who built this world with science, technology, medicine, engineering, maths, with courage and fortitude, endurance and attitude. We'll follow the echoes from Essex. We're proud of their triumphs in Essex. We'll fight like the women of Essex to build a new dawn.
Hello everyone, I'm Ian Knowles, the Artistic Director and Theatre Manager here at Chelmsford City Theatres. Welcome to the digital version of Chelmsford Civic Theatre. This, the fifth of our online Zoom performances of part of Essex 2020 in partnership with the amazing Electric Voice Theatre and Essex Music Education Hub. For tonight's performance, Soundings 5. Florence Attridge, the secret radio pioneer from Chelmsford, which is even more poignant this year when you consider on the 15th of June we commemorated our 100th anniversary of the world's first entertainment broadcast from here in Chelmsford. Welcome back again to everyone from last week and anyone new joining us tonight. For tonight's performance, please look at the chat notes on how to pin the live BSL sign language interpreter video to your screen for people wishing to follow the signing of this event, and also look at the chat notes for any other technical issues. There will be a question and answer session after the performance tonight, so if you have any questions for any of our artists and experts, please send them to everyone in the chat box. As in the live theatre, please put your mobile phones on silent and please turn your PC microphone and camera off. And as I need to remind everyone every week, otherwise if you don't, you will be filmed and we see and hear everything and we don't want to. But do feel free at the end of the performance tonight to put your microphone back on and applaud even our amazing cast and experts, which I'm sure you will want to do. For tonight's performance of Soundings 5, Florence Attridge, the secret radio pioneer from Chelmsford, our artists and experts are Artistic Director, Composer, Soprano from Electric Voice Theatre, Francis Lynch, Production Manager, Sound Designer, Herbie Clark, British Sign Language Interpreter, Lauren Lister, Composer, Cheryl Francis Hald. Taking care of us from Chelmsford Theatre's marketing team are Alex and Becca. We're also joined by mezzo-soprano from BBC Singers Margaret Cameron, baritone Grion Thomas, digital artist Jack Connell, our resident expert Dr. Patricia Farah, science historian, Emeritus Fellow of Clare College, Cambridge. And this week we have two special guests, Caroline Rickson, Marconi engineer and maths teacher, and our scientific expert is from BAE Systems here in Chelmsford, Ingrida Yorita, mathematician and simulation scientist. And so turning to tonight's performance, no matter if you're tuning in using the latest radio wave tracking device from Alpha Centauri, or you're in the wooden shed at the bottom of your garden trying to get your cat's whisker to work, please welcome to the Virtue Civic stage, Dr. Patricia Farah, who will begin with the story of Florence Attridge.
Judging from her photograph, Florence Attridge was a beautiful and ambitious young woman, and she lived in Chelmsford her entire life. Her childhood home was in Molsham Street, where she lived with her parents and 3 brothers. So this picture is from 1909, when she was 8 years old. When she gazed into the window of this dress shop, these are the sort of clothes she might have seen. This is what fashionable women were wearing in 1908. And this particular picture survives because they were suffragists campaigning to improve women's rights. Whether or not Florence Attridge or her mother joined them, she certainly benefited from their success.
Shout, 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 up with your song, cry with the wind, for the dawn is breaking. March, march, swing you along, wide blows our banner and hope is waking. Song with its story, dreams with their glory, lo they call and glad is the word. Loud and louder it swells, thunder of freedom, the voice of the Lord. Shout, shout, shout. Long, long, we in the past, cowered in dread from the light of heaven. Strong, strong, stand we at last, fearless in faith and with sight new given. Strength is our beauty, life with its duty. Hear the voice, oh hear and obey. These beckon us on. Open your eyes to the blaze of the day. Shout, shout, shout. Comrades, ye who have dared, first in the battle to strive and sorrow, scorned, spurned, naught have ye cared, raising your eyes to a wider morrow, ways that are weary, days that are dreary, toil and pain, by faith ye have borne. Hail, hail, victors we stand, wearing the wreath that the brave have won. Shout, shout, up with your song. Shout, shout, shout.
Like these women, babies also dress differently. So these are both, I'm about to show you pictures of baby boys, except they seem to have disappeared. These pictures are both little boys. Attitudes have changed dramatically since then. This is what a baby catalogue advised in 1918.
The generally accepted rule is pink for the boys and blue for the girls. Pink, being a more decided and stronger colour, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl.
Names were also different. Florence now sounds traditional, but when Attridge was born in 1901, it was very fashionable. The name was invented in 1820, when Florence Nightingale was born in Florence and her parents called her after the city. They had no idea that she would become such an influential role model for young women.
On a dark, lonely night, on Crimea's dread shore, there'd been bloodshed and strife on the morning before. Some crying for help, but there's none to be found. And God in his mercy he pitied rise. And the soldier so cheerful in the morning does arise. Oh, forward, my lads, may your hearts never fail. You're cheered by the presence of Miss Nightingale. You're cheered by the presence of Miss Nightingale.
I imagine that in this COVID year, many baby girls will also be called Florence, after relatives cared for in the special Florence Nightingale hospitals, because she became known as the Lady of the Lamp after she travelled out to Crimea, where she nursed men who were dying from their wounds and from the infectious diseases that flourished in the unsanitary conditions. She saved thousands of lives by introducing new hygiene measures, which is why the hospitals we're using now were named after her. In the early 20th century, when Florence Attridge was born, Florence Nightingale was famous not only for her medical innovations, but also as a professional statistician. She invented rose diagrams to provide powerful visual evidence that her reforms were reducing infection rates. So in 1901, Attridge's parents were giving their new baby a name that symbolised scientific progress, female independence, and hope for the new century. And their daughter certainly lived up to that promise. In 1946, Florence Attridge was awarded the British Empire Medal by George VI. You can see his initials, GR, on the right, as official recognition of the invaluable contribution she'd made to the war effort. Her name's engraved around the edge. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a problem here for historians because her activities were classified as secret, so it's hard to find out exactly what she did, but it was something to do with developing special radio equipment during the Second World War. She worked her whole life at the Marconi factory in Chelmsford. When she was born, the factory had only recently been opened. Her father worked there as a steel grinder, but many of the staff were women. Chelmsford's biggest employer was HOFFMAN'S, the UK's first ball-bearing factory. Hundreds of women worked there, standing for hours at a time in long production lines to make vital components for cars and aeroplanes. During the First World War, women were recruited in their tens of thousands to work in factories and replace the men who'd gone overseas to fight. Florence Attridge was just too young for that, but the war and the suffrage movement changed every woman's life forever. Afterwards, instead of being live-in servants confined to the basement of a large house, they found financial independence and freedom by getting jobs in the new industries that were developing. My grandmother was also called Florence, but her family lived in Nottingham. Like her four sisters, she worked as a machine operator in a lace factory. In contrast, Florence Attridge lived in Chelmsford, where she could pick a less traditional career. Soon after the war ended, while she was still a teenager, Florence Attridge went to work in the Marconi factory branch in New Street, Chelmsford. It was built in only 17 weeks by a labour force of 500. And this is what it looked like inside in 1922 while she was there. Like my grandmother making lace in Nottingham, Attridge performed repetitive yet intricate work that demanded close attention, but must have become very tedious and hard on her hands. Her shifts were usually 12 hours long. My grandmother left the lace factory to get married and never received a pay packet again. That was normal. Wives were expected to be supported by their husbands, and married women weren't even allowed to be teachers or doctors or civil servants. And presumably my grandmother dressed my mother in blue. Florence Attridge made a different life choice. She stayed at Marconi for many years and only resigned her post to get married after the Second World War. Nobody realised it at the time, but when the first Marconi factory opened in a disused silk factory in Hall Street, it heralded a revolutionary change that transformed society. I'm speaking to you through Zoom, and it seems quite normal that audiences can sign in and hear me throughout the world. But in its early days, radio offered an extraordinary and unprecedented experience. For the first time, international communication was two-way and instantaneous. Before then, even a telegram could take a couple of days to reach its destination. At first, radio was mainly used for naval and military messages. And so here are two early ship radio rooms, one from 1910, and on the right, the Titanic equipment that radioed for help in 1912 and is credited with saving around 700 lives. During the 1920s and 30s, radio was developed commercially, and people could buy radio sets, but then they were called wirelesses, to use at home and listen to public broadcasts. The older tuner on the left has a large black horizontal coil, and making coils like that was one of Florence Attridge's responsibility. Wirelesses transformed family life. They sold well because they were cheap, and one reason they cost so little was that women, like Florence Attridge, were underpaid. Unfortunately, the gender pay gap is something we're still concerned about, but at least there are now laws ensuring equal pay for equal work. Back then, women were routinely paid 2/3 of a man's salary for the same work, not just in Chelmsford, but in factories, schools and laboratories all over the country. If employers were looking for dexterity rather than brute strength, they preferred women, and for a woman, it was a choice between a low-paid job or no job at all. Money problems were also the main reason that Guglielmo Marconi came to Chelmsford. Although other researchers developed the scientific ideas, he decided to focus on the commercial potential of radio waves. By 1896, he was ready to go, but the Italian government refused to listen to his ambitious plans. The British government showed far more interest, so he came over here. He took out British patents for his inventions, carried out more experiments, and founded his Chelmsford business. This Radio Times notice of 1923 shows how keen Marconi was to protect his rights. He's threatening to prosecute anyone who infringes the licensing agreements. These are just two examples of early Marconi transmitters and receivers. It's clear that constructing them involved several different stages and demanded skilled care during the assembly process. Marconi's ambitions grew, and in 1920 he invited the Australian singer Nellie Melba to star in his live entertainment show. It was transmitted from the New Street factory where Florence Attridge works, so perhaps she was among the crowds lining the street to see Melba arrive. It was billed as the world's first, but in fact a local band singer had got there earlier. Winifred Sayer worked at HOFFMAN'S, Chelmsford's other big factory, and she was recruited to liven up Marconi's news programmes. Standing on a stone floor, surrounded by packing cases, she performed the first song ever heard on radio. And despite the crackly static, she was heard as far away as Portugal and Norway. She sang Absent by John Metcalfe, words by Catherine Young Glenn.
MZX calling.
Sometimes between long shadows on the grass, the little truant waves of sunlight pass. My eyes grow dim with tenderness the while, thinking I see thee, thinking I see thee smile. And sometimes in the twilight gloom apart, the tall trees whisper heart to heart. From my fond lips the answers fall, thinking I hear thee, thinking I hear thee call, thinking I hear thee call.
Technically, the blue plaque is right. Nellie Melba's was the first official broadcast from Hall Street. But before long, a local hero, Florence Attridge, will have her own blue plaque installed in Chelmsford. So just wait for further news from the Chelmsford Civic Society. This was where Florence Attridge worked every day for many years. The women are spaced well apart from each other, so there's no possibility of reducing efficiency by gossiping. Over many years of toil, she became an expert technician. And there's only one man in the room, and he's standing at the back. He's the foreman, superintending the women to make sure they keep working. Attridge must have shown exceptional diligence and intelligence, because eventually she was promoted and put in charge of her own team. And she stayed at Marconi's for about 30 years. But unlike some of her colleagues, she survived a German bombing raid on the night of 9th of May 1941. By then, she was supervising a group of hand-picked women placed in a separate room because they were involved in secret defence work. They were probably developing the British Type 3 Mark II radio, which was used by secret agents and resistance groups operating in occupied territory. The Marconi factory made 400 of them. They weighed only 8 pounds and needed specialised miniature components, which could only be entrusted to the most skilled employees. When Florence Attridge was awarded her British Empire Medal, she received letters from the King, an Admiral, and the mysterious K3, which was part of the Naval Intelligence Breaking Codes section. And she went on working at Marconi for 4 more years, but in 1950, when she was 49, she left to get married, and she stayed in Chelmsford until she died in 1975. By then, the factory had changed quite a bit. So these photos are from the beginning and the end of her working life. Florence Attridge was a unique individual whose existence has been revealed because of the medal she was awarded. Over the decades, many thousands of other women worked at Marconi and Chelmsford, and perhaps their diaries or their letters survive in Essex attics and one day will be discovered. The company no longer exists, but many Essex people carry the Marconi story in their memories. Even so, Essex-born composer Cheryl Frances Hode had no luck discovering more about Attridge when she was preparing to write a new work about her for Electric Voice Theatre to perform at this event tonight.
Yes, it was very hard to find information about her. I contacted lots of my friends of my grandmother, who worked at Marconi's as a teenager, wondering if anyone had heard of her. As luck would have it, however, Frances M. Lynch, the artistic director of Electric Voice Theatre, had already written a wonderful text on the character of Florence for an earlier podcast, and I thought it would work perfectly set to music. The brief was that the piece should be about Florence Attridge, but I had two voices and not just one to use. It took me a long while to work out what the other voice in this piece should do, but after lots of searching on the internet, I found the manual to a spy radio that Florence had worked on during her times at Marconi. What struck me was the sheer courage one would have had to operate one of these machines. For a start, there were so many components, and this state-of-the-art radio weighed over 30 pounds. Unlike today, the setup involved antenna wires that were up to 100 feet in length. I imagined getting caught in the act of sending clandestine messages and having to hide such a device. The piece is inspired by both Florence's story and the bravery and skill of the makers and operators of the Secret Spy set. It's called Thinking I Hear Thee Call, and we're going to hear it now for the first time. It has an electronic backing track, and the Electric Voice Theatre singers are Frances as Florence, and Margaret Cameron as the spy who has just received one of the sets Attridge has built.
My name is Florence Attridge, and I work at Marconi's new street winding shop, making radio sets. I've been here since just after World War I and stayed all through World War II. I got this letter from the King and this British Empire medal, but I can't tell you what it was for.
Operating instructions. Suitcase set, Type 3, Mark II, equipment. Suitcase containing transmitter, receiver, combination power pack for AC mains, and 6-volt battery operation. Instruction manual.
You can't get more Essex than me. I was born in Chelmsford, been here all my life. I started out on the shop floor,
Bears box containing a 100-foot aerial wire.
working on one of those long rows of benches with 4 or 5 of us
10-foot
girls
earth wire.
on one side.
Transmitting key. Telephone headset. 10 fuses. Pipe. One receiving value 7.
The only man in the room, the supervisor, was walking around, making sure we had our heads down. So we kept busy,
Receiving valve 7R7.
doing the same finicky tasks, day after day, day after day.
Total weight 34 pounds.
Until our backs ached and our fingers were sore.
Before setting up to establish communication, the proposed site should be examined as to its suitability for the installation of an efficient aerial and earth system, and the question of a power supply considered. If not available, 6-volt accumulator may be procured. This should be of the automobile type, fully charged and in good condition. 2 such batteries may, with advantage, be used in parallel. Open the suitcase and examine the apparatus.
During World War II, I worked in a small room, very different from the shop floor, building bisects.
Outdoor aerial, great care must be used to erect the most efficient indoor aerial possible.
That was much better.
At least a quarter wavelength wire should be used.
No one else was allowed in, and I was the supervisor. So there were no men at all. We knew we were involved in something very important and secret.
If circumstances restrict activities to one room, the aerial wire should be arranged in zigzag fashion across the room about a foot below the ceiling.
Oh, had a great sense of pride and never breathed a word of what we did outside. Though we did sometimes grumble about being paid less than the men.
An efficient earth is most important. The ideal wire to a larger sheet of copper embedded in moist earth near to the transmitter, and to attach the free end of the wire to the earth terminal of the transmitter. A water pipe may be convenient.
Florence Attridge died, I think it must have been in 1975, and just 5 years later there was another recruit to Marconi's, Caroline Rickson, who was looking for sponsorship to train as an engineer and, to work there too. Her circumstances were very different from Florence's, particularly with regards to the number of men. Florence had been surrounded by women, of course, but Caroline was the only woman in a sea of men. But I don't need to tell you her story. She's here to tell you herself.
Hi. Between 1980 and 1984, I studied for an engineering degree at Plymouth. I realised how forward-thinking the principal at my A-level college was in 1979, because he was the one who told me about WISE, Women in Science and Engineering, and suggested that I looked at engineering as a career. The course was known as the sandwich degree, which meant that part of the degree, the first 3 years, included work experience. I was fortunate enough to have been offered a sponsorship by Marconi's where my work experience would take place, and as a bonus, I received a small bursary while studying my degree. That's me many moons ago when I first started at Plymouth. Marconi's had a really thorough training scheme overseen by Tony Arnold. I was the only female out of a group of 20 or so undergraduates. We were all studying at various universities up and down the country, and we were all good mates. And we even went on a huge camping holiday together one year. Every year during our degree, as part of our industrial training, we spent 5 months or so working at Marconi's in Chelmsford, and we were paid money too. The first year I did this, I started my training on the machine floor at New Street with all the other first year undergraduates, learning the basics of using milling machines, lathes and general metalwork. My arrival on the first day was a surprise to most of the men on the shop floor, as you can imagine. They initially stared and then they whistled. I was really embarrassed, and I never really enjoyed walking through the building after that, although I had to work there for a while. Every day we clocked in and out, which was a novel experience for us. We all took our tea breaks at the same time as the men, and the tea room was actually a large square-shaped room in the middle of the shop floor there, with glass walls covered in newspapers, so you could not see inside. In those days, smoking at work was allowed, and the air inside the tea room was uncomfortable for various reasons. Training over the following years involved working in other buildings in New Street alongside engineers, and we gradually learnt how each department ran and how all the other departments liaised with each other. So that once we graduated, we were offered full-time jobs in Marconi's. And by then, because we had spent short spells in different departments, we had a fairly good idea of which part of the company we all wanted to work in. I started work in 1984 in the HF High Frequency Design Department, working on communication receivers for commercial and military use. I was part of a team developing a new HF receiver, modifying the existing design to a better specification. After successfully designing and testing a prototype, we would then liaise with the drawing room, the production staff, and the test department, a lengthy process. And then at the end of that, roughly about 2 years, a finished product would be produced. I was based in the village of Writtle. I used to cycle there every day. Hard to imagine now when you look at the roads around there. The Writtle site was incredibly old and wild looking, the opposite to the organised grandeur of Marconi's in New Street. You saw those photographs earlier. But I loved the fact in Writtle that the buildings looked as if they hadn't changed since the 1940s. I was also told that the old huts in the overgrown grass at the back of the building had been used by Marconi himself doing early experiments with transmitting radio signals. In fact, I later found out that the hut was used by Christopher Cockerell, the hovercraft pioneer, and he worked there to the 1960s. The whole site now has been built. There's a new housing estate there, but I'm glad to know that the hut that Christopher Cockerell worked in is now on show at Sanford Mill as they rescued it. Marconi's was part of GEC, and they were awarded a huge contract by the American Navy, worth about £200 million at the time, to develop an anti-jamming communication system. The system was to be based on the one used by the Royal Navy at the time, and I was one of the lucky ones who were invited to join the development team. At the time, it was the largest order received by GEC. The Americans wanted a new type of HF communication system where the radio signal or the carrier frequency was not fixed but changed frequently, making it exceedingly difficult to listen to the signal if you were the enemy. Imagine trying to listen to Radio Essex if the frequency kept on changing. It'd be difficult to hear anything. The other point was that if you don't know what frequency is being used to transmit signals, you can't block or jam the signal to stop it reaching the intended receiver. The contract was given the name HFAJ, High Frequency Anti-Jamming at the time. Margaret Thatcher was PM and Ronald Reagan was US President. Some of you will remember those times. Remember that joke remark Ronald Reagan made about the Russians when he was live on the mic? Something like, "We begin bombing in 5 minutes." Well, HFAJ was happening at that time. The Cold War was still present. People were fearful and distrusting of everyone east of the Berlin Wall. So the HFAJ system was to be fitted to virtually every ship, submarine, aircraft, and shore station operated by the US Navy over the next 10 years. I was lucky enough to spend time in Texas working on the project alongside a mixture of American and British engineers and some women at last. I was working on the systems side, how to integrate all the individual components and units together to make a working system. A few years later, I then moved to another local company, developing HF communication transmitters and receivers, mainly for third world countries. So this is me here, and I'm standing in front of a transmitter. This company was smaller, and I also enjoyed this job because it involved more different skills, apart from development, but we did testing, writing the training manuals, and then in this case here, I trained the operators on how to use the transmitters as well. So this is a group of men that were going to use, that had bought this equipment, and they came from Djibouti in East Africa. So I was training them up. I left engineering in the early 1990s to have children and ended up retraining to be a mathematics teacher, which I still do today. I'm lucky I can use my experience and knowledge of industry to explain in lessons how mathematics can be used in the real world.
Maths. Strength in numbers. Maths. Strength in numbers. Maths. Strength in numbers. Maths makes trade and travel. Maths divides war and peace. Maths makes money, money, money. Maths calculates life and death. Maths parallels form and beauty. Maths equals maps and models without math. It is impossible. And as Caroline left engineering, another young girl, growing up very far away from Chelmsford in Lithuania, was thinking as Florence and Caroline had done before her about what to do with her life. And finding that she loved maths, she followed a path that led from her homeland through the United States of America to Japan, and obviously from there to Chelmsford, where she found herself in one of Marconi's original buildings. Now, the company didn't survive, but many of the buildings are still here. So Ingrida Juraita is now working in a field which I think Florence Attridge would have been fascinated by, and perhaps she might have been involved in if she'd been born 100 years later.
Hello, so my name is Ingrida Juraita and I work for BAE Systems, Applied Intelligence in Great Barrow, Chelmsford. So my current role encompasses a lot of different responsibilities like people management, project management, and technology strategy. The closest to the science are probably the systems engineering activities with a focus on the space systems. But I've been in this role only for a year. And now the next slide I have here shows that my career path was not really a straightforward one. So my previous role was a group lead for around 3 years, so responsible for the communications, R&D, research and development across air, land and sea domains. Before that, just when I came to the Great Barrow site, I was a model engineer working on radar systems. And before that, I was a mathematician working across a range of different topics, from modeling autonomous swarms for the defense applications and also to new approaches for military aircraft pilot competency assessment using physiologic and other mathematical technique. And before coming to the UK in the first place, I had a chance to be a scientist assistant working in Japan and researching chaotic systems that could be applied to secure communications. Now, also as most of the students, I worked in many different roles, from purchasing manager to hotel manager, and across both Lithuania, Japan, and US. But since my background is pure maths, my first role after graduation was a mathematician. But when working for BAE Systems, math is not enough for designing systems and products. Which meant that I had to learn systems engineering on the job, which is the core of what I do today, making sure we design and manufacture safe products and platforms that are fit for purpose, addressing the actual problem that the customer has. One of the other responsibilities at the moment include TDCP development for the European Space Agency. Now, this technology that looks like a server box, here we have the first generation, and here's the latest generation, which is called Tracking, Telemetry and Command Processor. Sometimes we describe it as interplanetary smartphone because it allows to communicate it with spacecraft anywhere in the solar system. And it may be around Mars or near Mercury or traveling even further away to explore the universe. Now, in order to send the communication signals and receive it back, ESA have these huge 35-meter antennas. But when antennas receive the signal back, it's very noisy from traveling through hundreds of millions of kilometers through space. Then it's back to TCP's responsibility to extract the very weak signal that actually comes from the satellite itself. On top of that, TTCP has the responsibility to track the satellite to know where exactly it is in the universe. And this platform can track deep space platforms to within a centimeter, sometimes better than our navigation systems on Earth. Now, sometimes we describe this problem, but it's as challenging as hitting a dartboard in New York while you're still standing in London. So as you can imagine, developing a system like this required a lot of innovation and hard work, and also a number of different disciplines working together. Now here I have a couple of pictures from ESA deep space missions. Here we have the famous Rosetta, a journey to Comet 67P, and also the ExoMars mission, trying to confirm whether life has ever existed on Mars. So just to emphasize all the amazing ESA images of the comets and planets of our solar system that never stop mesmerizing the world come back through the same TTCP box. And the interesting part is that just like Marconi invented radio in Chelmsford, the TTCP has also been designed and developed, and still is, in one of the original Marconi buildings. Our site is currently called BAE Systems AI Labs, and this slide shows you its history back to 1936, when the land was acquired by Marconi Wireless Company. And for those who are not familiar with Chelmsford, this map shows you the different locations that I know of Marconi sites across the city. And we have New Street, Hall Street, Rittle Road, and also here, Great Baddow. Now, TTCP from this side travels then around the world to ESA deep space ground stations. And this particular photo shows the installation in Germany. Now, solving problems and designing new systems sometimes feel like lifting a planet. We tried here, and can't say it's been very successful, but engineers and scientists get also to see the most fascinating state-of-the-art technologies firsthand. Here, our team had a chance to go to the Space Symposium conference in the US to showcase the TTCP we have here in the corner, but at the same time, we get to see and understand the research that other companies undertake. So with Marconi sending the first Atlantic wireless message, Florence Attridge contributing to SPAR radios, and BAE Systems TTCP enabling Europe's deep space exploration missions, it seems like Chelmsford has never stopped being the cradle of innovation and hard work. And this last photo here I have is of a Rittle Road site, which was Marconi's radar company, and where I happen to live today. Thank you.
So, Ingrid, do you actually live in that building that you just showed?
No, there is no longer that building. It's been, unfortunately, apartments and new houses. So
yeah, that's a shame in a way, isn't it?
Just the land.
Yeah, it's the same land. But your job, I know that you're only telling us a really tiny bit about your job, and that you do all sorts of extraordinary things. I just wondered what your favourite bit of the job is.
So I think it's the variety of problems I get involved in, and also the great minds I get to work, because as you can imagine, all the challenging problems require multiple engineers and scientists to work together. And then at the end, you get to see those technologies firsthand before they even trialed.
Yes, yeah, that sounds like quite an amazing thing. And I know you are, as you said, you started off doing mathematics, and it's kind of interesting to me that Caroline, who spoke earlier, if you're there, Caroline, you became a maths teacher. So mathematics, I know you were both kind of found mathematics very kind of simple for you. But I mean, as a musician, of course, I use mathematics a lot. But I wondered if you could tell me why you think people are afraid of maths.
Well, I think people have been told to be afraid of maths, maybe from past experiences, something like that with parents. But if you think about it, when you first start talking, as a baby, as a toddler, the first thing you start learning is counting on your fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And then you go on to learn about the days in the week, how many days, how many months in a year, and you're learning patterns and routines, and you're applying it to what's going on around you. Well, that's what mathematics is. And it's really finding where maths is being used all around you. And that makes it more understandable and more familiar, and hopefully less scary for people. But it's all around us, and it's just realizing where you can find maths around you And we do start it from such a young age. It's a shame that people, for some reason, do get put off by it later, but there's no need to be.
We need more inspirational teachers like you, Caroline. I know you are a very inspirational maths teacher. But I wonder, what do you think, Ingrida, about that?
I think it's the same. It's just when we go on, we forget that problems, the difficult problems, if you are challenged to solve straight away, some problems quite seem impossible to solve, and that's the scary bit. You don't know where to start, but I think if we can break down the bigger problems into smaller, that we can understand and apply the same rules, the same, knowledge, then it seems more manageable and not so scary.
I think it's interesting because that's a technique that, of course, musicians use. You get given scary scores, like, for example, the one we got the other day from Cheryl Francis Hode, and you have to break it down into its little bits. I mean, it's interesting because Caroline, of course, knows about music as well, because you were very much a musician as well when you were younger. We both have played the viola in the past. Yep. So, Cheryl, were there mathematics in that piece where we write to break it down?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't exactly mathematics. All the Morse code was actually a Morse code message of the text that you wrote about in Florence Attridge's words. So, there's something sort of related to maths there. But I use maths in my pieces a lot, whether it's structuring something, whether it's putting in secret codes, thinking of the general structure of my piece. So I'm always thinking about it. I'm not a very advanced mathematician, but it's yeah.
I think that thing that Caroline, you were saying about patterns, that you learn about patterns and how they work, and I think that's true, Cheryl, of writing music. It's a lot of it has to do with patterns and exploring an idea. So
yeah. Making the connections between the patterns sometimes as well.
Yeah, and I think this thing about teaching is quite important. I don't know if you do teaching as well, Cheryl. Do you teach music?
Not recently, no.
Not recently, but I think Patricia, if she's with us, you teach at Cambridge University, but you don't teach maths.
I don't, but I do teach people who are studying science and maths, and they tend to fall back on more and more and more facts. And what I try to persuade them is, of course, you have to make sure your historical facts are right, but then after that, you can interpret those facts, you can reach your own opinion, and as long as you can back that up, that's what counts, and that's how originality arises in history. And at first they find that pretty scary. They keep wanting to retreat back into the facts. But after a while they find it very liberating that they're being encouraged to express their own ideas. And they are absolutely wonderful ideas that young students have.
Yeah, I've noticed something here, looking at all the cameras that are on, including our wonderful Lauren Lister there, who's interpreting, that we're all women. And strange that, isn't it, in a project like this? And I was just wondering whether any of our guests have experienced any discrimination in their particular field because of being women. Who'd like to go first?
I don't mind going first. I have to say, when I first started, going back to the 80s, there are lots of men in the older generation, so probably my age and older now, when I look back at it now, who did used to say things to me like, a woman's place is in the home. Well, that's like a red rag to a bull to me, really. So you then have to prove yourself while you're there, don't you? And ignore what they have to say. The good thing was that everyone in my generation, male and female, and even slightly older than me at the time, fully appreciative of why you're there. You're there for what you can do, not whether you're male or female, is what you're capable of. And I think just with the older generation, having grown up working in that kind of industry and other industries with no other women around, it's probably a real shock for them, and maybe even a threat. I don't know. But I mean, soon when they get used to you and they realise you're not bad at what you do and you've got a sense of humour and you get on with other people, what's the problem?
I think you're absolutely right that a lot of men tend to regard women who do science and maths as a threat. I've got a degree in physics, and in my year there were about 8 women and something like 200 men. And we were really looked on with suspicion, not just by the lecturers, but also by the other students. And that's something that went on a long while until, I don't know, about 10 or 20 years ago. A woman with a degree in physics used to be regarded as something of an oddity, but thank goodness attitudes are beginning to change.
Yeah.
What are you finding, Ingrida, in your work?
Well, fortunately, I was quite lucky in this situation. I think I've always felt support from all the colleagues and mentors. But I think, as you were saying, in my time, like pure maths that I studied, we had just a few girls. But for physics, it was probably 50-50%, both girls and boys, which is quite strange. They don't like, let's say, dry maths, but physics seemed to be acceptable as well.
Strange. So I was just, we haven't got huge amounts of time because we wanted to listen to your talks and everything discussion, but I just wondered, Cheryl, you mentioned when you were talking earlier that your grandmother worked at Marconi's in Chelmsford, and of course Ingrida is working in the building, and Caroline worked there as an engineer, and I just wondered what sense you all have of how important Marconi's is in Chelmsford. I'm sure some of our audience will have their own thoughts about that, and we'd really like to hear those in a minute as well.
I mean, from my perspective, I was only getting it through my grandmother, but Marconi's was just the thing in Chelmsford, and it was something we were all, sort of in awe of, and it was a source of fascination throughout my life. So it's just so amazing to be able to write a piece about it. Great.
Yeah, Chelmsford, the birthplace of radio. What more can I say? It is so, so important.
And I think it's for new engineers as well. It's quite interesting, and important to know that you are working in the same area. So you put kind of a pressure to you to innovate and create something new and exciting. You have this responsibility to keep up, Yes,
I can see that. So, do you think that you're all linked to Marconi, of course? Do you think that's true? That would be true now? I mean, maybe our audience can tell us that in a minute. Of a lot of people who still live in Chelmsford, there are still a lot of people who have memories of Marconi's in the past. Maybe we'll get our audience to tell us that in a minute if they have their own memories of Marconi. But I think certainly it would be interesting to know from our team. So this includes our singers, Margaret and Guyon, and who else is there? Had any of you heard of Florence Attridge before this project?
No, absolutely not.
No, nobody had heard of it.
No.
And I'll tell you, we hadn't either. We were looking, when we first started looking for women from Essex for our project, because we've been looking at lots of women. I mean, we now have a list of about 50 that we could have investigated. But we found Florence Attridge because we visited the museum at Chelmsford, and I highly recommend that to everybody because there is a display about her in the museum, which is fascinating. And you've seen some of the things tonight. But at the time, there was also an exhibition called Snapping the Stiletto, which is a project that's about to re-energize itself and keep going. And it was from there that we learned almost everything. We learned about Winifred Sayer, who Margaret sang the song of. And of course, once we had found these people, we then needed to find people who would help us look into them. So I think, Patricia, you spoke quite a bit, and so did I, to Alan Pamphilon and Tim Wander, who'd done a huge amount of research in this area, hadn't you?
Well, yes, and they've both put out appeals. And as I said in my talk, I am sure that there are letters and diaries sort of tucked away in drawers all over Essex. And I think if people could find these family memoirs, it would be wonderful, because Florence Attridge was unique, obviously, but there's a whole load of other women out there who were doing very important work as well.
So do nominate anyone you know for our Forgetting to Remember project. You'll find it at Chelmsford Civic Theatre's website. And let's all try to remember Attridge and all the other women that we've looked at so far: Margaret Cavendish, Elizabeth Tollett, and Ellen Wilmot, and Guglielmo Lister, and hopefully from Leytonstone, and hopefully we'll find more.
So I just want to butt in now, excuse me, to say thank you to all our amazing artists and our experts. If we were in the real theatre, and you can see our representation behind me of the Marconi factory where those first radio broadcasts were done. If we were in the theatre, I would now be asking everybody to join us in the bar, grab a drink, and if you're feeling brave enough, to put some questions to our experts. So I'm going to pass over now to Alex, who I believe has several questions from our audience tonight.
Yes, thank you, Ian, and thank you to everyone. Another brilliant soundings, and we've got another one next week, haven't we? So Beryl Platts, so come back for that one, same time, 7 p.m, and you can sign up for free. And I'll just do quick questions. We've got a few, so I'll race through them. But just to let you all know, if you do have a question, there's still time. So just pop it in the chat, or like Ian said, pop your mic on, pop your audio on, and we can all have a chat. So the first one is, Ingrida, did your family support your career choice? Were they very supportive when you grew up with your career?
I think as long as I went to university, they didn't mind. So the numbers was the easy choice for me. It seemed very simple to manipulate. So I went to continue maths, essentially, in the purest form possible. So yes, so they always supported me, and they sent me away to Japan for a year as well. So I think, and when I decided to come to UK, you know, it's not always like they stayed in Lithuania. So I think they wanted to come for me to come back, but I think they're happy I enjoy the work. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. We also have one for Jack, our local artist. Is Jack still here?
Yep, hi.
Yep, hi Jack. So someone says, we love your work. Where else can we see your art?
Well, so I have a YouTube channel, so I do videos for young people and adults as well. But I have a website, and I also use Instagram, so I can share all those links and stuff in the chat if you'd like.
Perfect. Yes, that's a great idea. Yeah, perfect. We've also got a question for those that worked at Marconi's or BAE, or any of the experts that want to jump in on this one. Did any of you that worked in that field have any concerns working on military applications, or did you just feel it was a necessary part of your work to forward expertise and learning in your chosen field?
Well, I guess I work for BAE Systems, and that's a very important question, sometimes very tricky, but we all say we're working for defense company, and that's where, you know, the importance comes, and you have to understand that some of the technologies are required for security and safety. I understand, yeah, that there are some, you know, sensitivities when you work potentially on weapons or otherwise. Luckily, I don't have this issue because the AL Labs always worked on R&D, research and development technologies related to more civil type applications.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It was part of the job, and again, for me, it wasn't weapons. It's more about communications, and I looked at that more as keeping people safe in communications, and maybe having a more effective strategy on ground by having good, effective communication. So that's the way I looked at it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We've got another one here. So the American courts have recently agreed the original Marconi room from the Titanic can be raised. Do you agree with this decision? And if so, why? And that's just open to all the panel.
Personally, I mean, a lot of people are going to disagree with me, and this is rather a sort of perhaps a bit of a miserable answer to give. But it seems to me that the world is in a terrible economic situation at the moment because of COVID. And perhaps that money, because it would be a huge amount of money to do that, perhaps it would be better spent on hospitals, social welfare, care for people who are suffering in Africa and Asia. And personally, I would rather see the funds diverted towards that, but I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me.
That's a tough one. I do agree with what you're saying as well, Patricia, but I'm thinking about from the historical sense, something about the Titanic is just mesmerizing, the whole story around it, the film. I just feel it's really important to preserve anything we have regarding what happened with that ship. Everyone's heard about it. I can even remember learning about it at school, and they're still learning about it now. I'm torn between the two things, actually.
I was once on a transatlantic voyage, and lots of lectures were being given. And the lectures that were by far and away the most popular were about the sinking of the Titanic. And I really couldn't understand it, because the last thing I wanted to know about when I was on a transatlantic ship was about a ship that had sunk. But that was what everybody was fascinated by. And when we got to the place where the Titanic had sunk, they stopped the ship, and everybody except me went rushing to the side of the boat to look over and see the actual spot. I just wanted to go on and make sure I got home.
And we've also got one question that's just come through the group chat, and that is for Caroline. What does it feel like to work in a group of just men? Did you think you were better at your job because of it, or push you more towards excelling in your career, do you think?
I think you have an advantage as a woman when you're working with men that it's going to go one way or the other, isn't it? They're either going to ignore you or they're going to listen to you because you're a woman. Luckily, I found they used to listen to me. I think there's a lot of mutual respect goes on between men and women in that field anyway, because of, the nature of the work. I just wanted to be treated the same as everybody else, nothing special. Hired and working because of what I could do, not that I was a woman.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, unless anyone wants to jump in and put their audio on, I think that's it for the question round.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Alex. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. And I'm just going to ask our cast and experts to put their mics and cameras on and to take a bow. You might just need to make a noise so we know who you all are. So thank you. So first of all, as always, to Francis and Herbie.
Thank you. Oh, Herbie, sorry, he's got to come round and look at. There we go.
Thank you.
Well done, Herbie. To Dr. Patricia Farah.
Thank you. I love doing this again.
Lauren Lister, our amazing signer. Grian Thomas, that's okay. Please put your mics on and please applaud if you want to. To Grian Thomas, Margaret Cameron, Jack Cannell, composer Cheryl Francis Hall, who surprised us tonight by converting Florence Attridge's voice to Morse code. Everyone at Chelmsford Theatres, thanks to Alex and Becca. And to our experts this week, Caroline Rickson, Marconi engineer and maths teacher.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
Thank you very much. And scientific expert from BAE Systems, Ingrida Urita, mathematician and simulation scientist.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Ingrida. Also, I've just got to carry on with the thanks. Just thanks to Chelmsford City Council, to Mark and Katie, Essex 2020, Arts Council England, Essex County Council, PRS, and of course Chelmsford City Theatres. Now, as you know, these sounding sessions take place every Monday at 7 p.m. This is in addition to our virtual choir sessions running every Wednesday at 7 o'clock until the 20th of September. As Alex said earlier, next Monday, join us Bank Holiday Monday, the 31st of August for episode 6, Beryl Platt, Baroness of Riddle and Aeroplane Engineer. For further details, you can go to chelmsford.gov.uk theatres and of course electricvoicetheatre.co.uk. Thank you everybody, and hopefully see you next Monday. Bye.
Echoes from Essex, echoes from Essex, across the county we hear them calling, from every corner of this fair land, the women who built this world of ours, the women who built this world, with science, technology, medicine, engineering, maths, with courage and fortitude, endurance and fight like no